We will now have an interaction between Mr. Asaduddin Owaisi and Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi, moderated by Niti Razan. A very brief introduction of our guest. Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi is a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha from the state of Maharashtra and a deputy leader and spokesperson from the Shiv Sena party. Mr. Asaduddin Owaisi is the president of the All India Majlis-e-Ittihadul Muslimin party. He is a four-time member of parliament representing Hyderabad constituency in the Lok Sabha. A very warm welcome to the guest.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank both Owaisi Saab and Priyanka Chaturvedi for coming and joining us here at the Kautilya School of Public Policy's Orientation Week. These are our, students. It's the first batch, and I think it's been great for them to be here, to be able to hear diverse voices when it comes to issues of policy making, nation building, etc. And one of the most important institutions, obviously, when it comes to nation building and policy making is our parliament, which unfortunately hasn't functioned the way it should for some time now, and this parliament session was a case in point. Both Priyanka Chaturvedi and Owaisi Saab have first-hand seen what has happened to that institution. So let me begin with you, Priyanka Chaturvedi, and when you joined parliament, what did it mean to you? I mean, what did you think its aim was, and is it very different from what you had imagined?
Firstly, many congratulations to all the incoming students, and I wish you all a very prosperous career and a good time at Kautilya. And I'm hoping some of the people I interviewed are here. Yay! Good. So I'm sure you all are as excited as we were when we were trying to get this batch going. So yes, Nidhi, with regards to your question, I'm a first-time MP, and unfortunately, ever since I got elected to the Rajya Sabha, we've been facing COVID, and we've been having these lockdowns. And I've been a part of 3 sessions. 2 of them got curtailed due to COVID, and the one that we attended recently, the monsoon session, was unfortunate washout where we saw a very deliberate logjam coming from the government of India. There were so many important discussions that have been pending, and as a member of parliament, I was hoping to bring to focus, for example, the gender gap in vaccination, for example, the vaccination going at a slow pace, COVID, are we prepared for the 3rd wave? Because US is seeing a spike in numbers, many other countries are seeing spike in numbers. We are seeing an economic instability, and we don't know where we are heading as a nation. Joblessness is at its peak. So there are many such issues that we thought we would be discussing. And just a day prior to the session beginning, there was this entire story that came out about how phones are being tapped and people are being monitored under the garb of national security. You are buying a spyware for national security, but you're using it against your opposition to silence voices, which is very obvious. So those are things which upset me, where we cannot have an engagement, we cannot have a dialogue, we cannot even use words right now in the parliament like farmers or women's security, safety, without our mics being muted. What you see are unruly scenes of the opposition. What is not being shown across television channels is how the entire opposition is being blocked and silenced. So that, as a parliamentarian, for me, is something which is exceedingly upsetting, and I'm sure everyone who's watching it wonders what happens to our parliamentary democracy. If government has some, responsibility for the citizens, so does the opposition. You cannot just roughshod the opposition like this. And right now, a united opposition is almost 60% of representation of India as a nation.
The counter question to that, Owaisi Saab, would be, and I think a lot of people would ask this as common citizens, is that, is there a need to disrupt the House? When the BJP did it in opposition, they were criticized for it. Should opposition parties necessarily rush to the well of the House to disrupt it? And isn't there a more constructive way to voice your protest? What would you say to that, Owaisi Saab?
To answer your question, let me reply to in 2 parts. The first is that as far as Parliament is concerned, it is part of our basic structure of our Constitution. Separation of powers is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. And our Constitution makers had devised this and adopted the separation of powers to ensure that there's a check on executive, there's a check by judiciary on laws which are being passed by legislature. So this government has completely destroyed any semblance of separation of powers which was there. So the government, unfortunately, one mistake which we have right now, the big mistake is that it is the executive which decides when parliament should be called and for how many days. That needs to be rectified. We require a fixed number of days in a year or in a calendar wherein the parliament sits for 80 days, 100 days. And secondly, the important question which Nidhi asked is that, you see, we as an opposition, this is my personal opinion, we fall in the trap of the BJP. Opposition party or opposition parties cannot have two different stands in Lok Sabha or in Rajya Sabha. If you allow a debate on COVID in Rajya Sabha, and then you don't allow any debate in Lok Sabha by the same opposition parties, I have only 2 members, so I don't have bigger voice in the opposition. But if you allow a debate in Rajya Sabha, you don't allow a debate in Lok Sabha, it gives a stick to the BJP or the ruling party to say, okay, see, you have allowed the Rajya Sabha to discuss COVID, but you do not discuss in Lok Sabha. Thirdly is that, yes, protest is very important, but I am of the opinion that if you stall the parliament, you are allowing the government to run away. We require the parliament to function, and the opposition must realize that, okay, we might not be having those numbers, but even if we allow debate on whatever little give and take, we will be able to expose the government badly, because had there been a debate on Pegasus, I would have stand up and said that, what gives you the right to tap my phone? How am I a national security threat to you? This would have sent a message to the masses in India that, look, this government is deeply involved in phone tapping and in entering your homes and houses. Thirdly is that by not allowing the parliament, we must accept the reality that this government does not believe in any parliamentary etiquette or or discussion. In the din, they have passed so many important bills, privatization of LIC, depositors getting their money back, so many other things. So we must have a debate. We cannot stall the house. If you stall the house, okay, it might look good. We have not allowed the BJP to run the house, but it is helping the government. It is helping government by we opposition not asking them probing questions. And the last point is that suddenly you allow a debate on OBC. We agree for that. Why? Because that is where the opposition parties feel it's a political issue for them going forward in the forthcoming elections. Now, how is it that to get votes, you allow the House to function, you cooperate with a dictatorial government, and when it comes to issues, other issues of farm laws, Pegasus, you keep quiet? So either the House should function completely, or the House should not function. You cannot have piecemeal. We allow Rajya Sabha to discuss COVID, we don't allow Lok Sabha to function, but we allow both the houses to debate on the OBC thing. That is where we are at fault, and we are helping, not helping, but we are giving an advantage, a political advantage to the BJP.
Priyanka, just a comment on that, on whether you agree with the opposition inadvertently helping the government, but I guess the counter to that would be, what do you do when the opposition was unitedly demanding a discussion on, say, the Pegasus issue, and the government just refused? So what are the options left?
Yes, so as far as Pegasus is concerned, there was a total denial to even discuss it on the floor of the House, whether it's the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. And I think that in itself proved that this government is adamant in having its way or the highway for the opposition. Now, with regards to disruption, while I do agree that we should give them a leeway, we should give them a chance to be held accountable, to corner them, to be able to explain to the people of the country what we are doing, why we are doing. However, I have a very simple question. Last session, I was part of the entire discussion, deliberation that happened. I did not see any response in the sense that, yes, we understand your concerns, we will address these concerns, and we will ensure that these concerns are looked after. It never comes across from this government. The government has decided we are bringing in an ordinance. We will escape all the parliament scrutiny. And now it's your responsibility as the opposition to let the House run and allow us to pass this ordinance into a law. So have a discussion as per our whims and fancy. We'll give you 1 hour to deliberate on it, 2 hours to deliberate on it. And after 2 hours, we are going to say, oh, opposition ko to sari cheezon se takleef hai. So we are doing this in the interest of the people of this country. You did not want, as far as I understand, maybe I'm new in this entire scheme of things. Asaduddin has more experience in how parliamentary democracy works. But if I'm not mistaken, COVID discussion in the Lok Sabha was only coming up as a short duration discussion of 30 minutes, where you cannot pass any motion, you cannot seek any accountability, and you cannot even put it for a vote. And I don't think so. Minister also deems it fit to reply. It's a 30-minute discussion. Everyone can have their say. Everybody knows in this, I mean, whoever's sitting in the auditorium, how many states are there, how many union territories are there, and there are how many political parties which want to speak on this particular issue. So 30 minutes, if you think that is an adequate time to, corner this government, I think we are having too much hope as far as this is concerned. So if you look at how the sessions have been running post 2014, there's a total disregard for opposition. Ordinance has become a route of passing laws which gives them the escape to not go through the scrutiny. So these are things which are small but need to be brought into focus simply because it shows that the government has absolutely no intent to get into a dialogue, discussion, or any kind of disagreement and then final decision. So that is where it stands.
Okay, I just want to re-emphasize to everyone here that we want to follow the Chatham House rules in this discussion. So let's not tweet or make public so that we can have I think, a very frank conversation with our guests here today. And it's just a more honest conversation. What you said, Owaisi Saab, in the beginning about the way bills are passed. Now, that is very important and that affects all of us as citizens. 22 bills were passed in this parliament session, despite all these disruptions, I think 20 of them in the Lok Sabha. And barely a few minutes were spent on each. Also, I think only about 11% of bills have been sent to select committees in the last few years. And there was a reason why select committees were set up. They were set up for greater parliamentary scrutiny of legislation, for suggestions to come forward, changes to be made, so that laws would not be passed in a rush. And we heard the Chief Justice yesterday talk about or lament about the fact that you have laws just being rushed through Parliament without any proper debate. How do we get out of this? Because at the heart of our democracy is our Parliament. And yet, we are seeing laws being rammed through in this sort of ham-fisted way. Even the farm laws actually were passed like that without discussion, which is why you had a sort of political backlash to it.
I totally agree with you. Because I started by saying that BJP under Mr. Modi as a Prime Minister does not believe in legislature scrutiny. The Prime Minister, unfortunately, has decided that he is a paragon of wisdom and virtue, and he knows what is good for 130 crore Indians. So that is why, a particular way is adopted that, okay, this is it, you do it. But I still feel that whatever little time we as parliamentarians get, we have to really prepare, work very hard in highlighting the weaknesses of the proposed bill and expose the government. Yes, they have the brute majority. They will not listen to suggestions. They will even defeat the amendments which are moved by the opposition parties. But end of the day, it is students like these who will get a message that, okay, you have an opposition which has highlighted a weakness. For example, when the National Judicial Accountability Bill was brought in the Lok Sabha in 2014 or 15, if I am not wrong, I was one of the few MPs who opposed it. And I said, this will be struck down by the Supreme Court. And everyone started laughing and, you have all those things in Parliament. But while I was going to Calcutta from Delhi, I happened to meet one retired judge of the Supreme Court. And he told me, Mr. Owaisi, you were the only one of the few MPs who pointed out it's unconstitutional, and it was proven right. So at least you have that comfort as an MP that, okay, we have done our work. And then please understand that if you speak or if Madam speaks in Rajya Sabha and you highlight the weakness of the government, that can be amplified through social media. That can be used through various platforms, social media, and this is where you target the BJP. Secondly, about even the little bit of bills which are being sent to standing committees, select committees, as my experience as a parliamentarian tells me, the quality of debate is worse in the Lok Sabha. You know, if you go and ask, I'm a member of the library committee of Lok Sabha. I asked a question 1 week ago, how many MPs come and sit in Lok Sabha library? They looked at each other and said only 3 or 4 MPs come in a session. So, you know, you don't understand the issues. So, you know, you are just blank over here, and whatever is given to you by the ruling party or by the opposition parties. And in standing committee, majority MPs come just to sign so that they can get that plane ticket and do all the work in Delhi. You know, so you have to really work hard. For example, I'm a member of science technology, and we had a good chairman, Jairam. Despite having huge differences with him, we worked very hard on the DNA bill. Very hard. Despite huge differences, I gave my dissent note. Then Jairam had to give his clarification note. This is where, you know, it is up to the MPs to really work hard to understand the rules of how Parliament works, and all to understand, yes, I agree with you, this government will not allow any dissent, any criticism, but you will have to use all those ways, methods, and be, you know, street smart in exposing them. But if you don't allow the Parliament to work, the Supreme Leader is happy because, you know, he sits in his comfort and says, okay, Parliament is not working fine. I will say whatever I say to Janta. The government does not believe in legislature. You know, they don't believe in separation of powers. That is why you see that the Prime Minister should not have laid the foundation stone of the new Parliament. By sitting over there and laying the foundation, he has sent a message that it is the executive which has overpowered the legislature. These are examples which I'm giving to make you understand my argument that this government is hell-bent on destroying the parliamentary system of democracy.
But Priyanka, coming back to how the opposition should conduct itself, we had these unprecedented scenes in the Rajya Sabha. I think it was the last day when marshals were called in, and there are two versions of what happened. Well, one we know is that there was a bunch of opposition MPs who climbed on tables, and it was a very unseemly, unruly sight. They claimed that marshals, apparently some of them were not marshals, they were, you know, plainclothes people, they claimed, that were brought in from outside, who manhandled them. The government says it was the marshals who were manhandled. Sharad Pawar, who is a veteran parliamentarian, I said in my 55 years in parliament, I've never seen scenes like this. I've never seen MPs being handled like this. So I think, again, tax-paying citizens, when they see the opposition standing up for what it believes in, that's fine. But I think when they see opposition members climbing tables or tearing up bills or papers, there's a sense of like, where is my money going? Why are you doing it like this? You know, how do you reconcile that?
So, two things I'd like to mention here. You brought in what the Chief Justice had said, and he said something extremely important in his statement. I'll come to your question later.
Yeah.
What he said was the laws that are being passed have so many loopholes that every time it comes to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has to take a decision on it. And that is something that should not happen. The reason it is going to the Supreme Court is also because an opposition is going unheard. And any constructive criticism coming from the opposition is totally disregarded. And that is why you see a logjam happening, even it reaching up to the Supreme Court. We saw it in farm bills, where the federal structure also was done away with to pass these farm laws. And what we said was we don't want a discussion on the farm laws anymore. Farmers have been protesting for months. Enough discussion has happened. We've seen protests happen. No conversation happening with the government. So let's just repeal the farm laws. This is the argument that the opposition had. Now, in terms of what was happening in the Rajya Sabha, I must tell you, I have been a witness to that. I was seeing a build-up of how the government was behaving. The government was refusing to acknowledge any issue for discussion that was coming forward from the opposition. We said, let's discuss COVID. Okay, that was agreed upon. Let's discuss Pegasus. No, that won't be happening. Let's discuss farmers. Okay, we are not talking about repealing of farm laws. We are talking about farmer welfare, which absolutely serves no purpose. And various other issues on economy, on vaccine shortage, etc. There was a total disregard. So when the farm law discussion came in, and it wasn't the farm law, it was farmer welfare, something to do with agricultural welfare, farmer welfare, future of farmer rights, etc., something like that. It was a very vague discussion. When it was agreed upon for a discussion also, it was a very vague discussion, and that is why you saw on day one where you saw some of our Punjab MPs and some of our Haryana MPs climbing up on the table and creating a ruckus. That is because all that discussion has already happened. You'll have still come forward and passed the farm laws. Our farmers are protesting, and yet you want to talk about farmer welfare.
But why respectfully, why do they have to climb on tables to make the point?
I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah.
The videos are out there. The chairman has taken a call, and he will take a call on suspension or whatever action needs to be taken. That's day one. Day two, the agreement for business by the Business Advisory Council as well as the list of business said that OBC bill is going to be discussed, and since, like he said, opposition as well as the government was in agreement, and after which we will postpone all the other discussion for another day. But as soon as the OBC reservation amendment happened, we saw them bring in the insurance bill. Now, general insurance bill is not something that you can pass in a hurry. It needs discussion, it needs deliberation. You are privatizing insurance companies. Lakhs of employees are employed there. They don't know what their future looks like. People have invested there. We need to have a discussion. All we said is let's move it to the next day. The government absolutely refused to do that. And that is why people came to the well of the house. But before we could go to the well of the house, there were around 40 marshals. Many of them were not from Rajya Sabha. I don't think that they were plain clothes, but they were people from not seen in the Rajya Sabha regularly. And the jostling I saw, the kind of pushback that I saw coming from the marshals, of course, marshals are not the ones who are responsible. It is the leader of the house of Rajya Sabha. I hold him totally responsible for allowing something like this to happen. You cannot be silencing 60% of India's representation in the parliament because you want to pass an ordinance, with a bill which suits some few people in this country and totally disregards majority of the population. And there was a lot of jostling happening, a lot of pushback happening, even from the from the marshals, and that is something which the government will not come across. And that's why we are saying let the footage, the entire footage, be released and let people judge for themselves.
So I'm curious, Owaisi Saab, what happens at the beginning of every parliament session when the speaker calls an all-party meeting and everybody comes out and says, democracy is great, we're going to have fruitful discussions, and everything goes south after that. Like, what do you all discuss in those all-party meetings then?
The all-party meetings are basically a mere formality wherein all opposition leaders gather, have a cup of tea, with some biscuits, and then the Prime Minister comes. All of us have to listen to his sermon of how the Parliament should function. Then we say, sir, we grovel in front of the Prime Minister, sir, ye bhi debate kar lijiye. Then the Prime Minister shows his magnanimity by saying, yes, everything under the sky will be discussed. We come out happily, assuming that everything will function. But the government has a particular agenda. They want all their bills to be passed, simple as that. They will not allow any criticism in any form. So we have to use the rule book properly. Even if, let us say, as far as I know, the discussion on COVID in Lok Sabha under Rule 193 has no censure motion. It is debated, and the Speaker has the inherent discretionary powers to enlarge it. But had that debate taken place in Lok Sabha, can you imagine the government being on the back foot, being exposed badly, showing how people died in Delhi because of lack of oxygen, people didn't get beds. This is where the government is very, very touchy, very, very touchy. They don't want any criticism. I mean, I'm sure, Nidhi, you have been a journalist, you might have faced so many, things that how the government pressurizes. So, I am of the opinion that we as opposition are falling in the trap of the government by not allowing the parliament to work. When I said this to some opposition party leaders, they looked at me and say, "हाँ, तू तो मिला हुआ है." मैं ठीक है भाई, if that is what you feel. You see, it's not question of, it's question of how you wriggle your way out of this huge 300 and odd MPs which they have in Lok Sabha. You have to find ways of hitting them hard and exposing them, because if you have a debate, I am sure opposition parties would have really slaughtered this government on various misdeeds, misgovernance, but we are allowing them, by saying, okay, we want this way. But then after 2-3 days, then it becomes very hard for the House to function. And then the government brings in the bill. The worst sufferers are the MPs when we cannot even bring our private members' bill. On Friday, time is earmarked for a private members' bill. That is not there. There are so many private members' bill which every MP has puts, but it doesn't come. So many questions are there in question hour. It gets postponed. Again, it helps the government. And the fun part is that you have fantastic ministers who cannot even reply to whatever is given to them. That is why I feel that we can really expose them badly. But all party meetings are just a mere formality. Everyone says we'll cooperate, government says cooperate, and the next day after 24 or 48 hours, everything is in
collapses.
tatters. Yeah.
Let me take questions now. And oh my goodness, we have so many questions. So that's great. I'm going to be partial to the women. So the young lady in the maroon shirt first. Please tell us your name and tell us who the question is for.
It's regarding the party whip. So don't you think it is curbing the freedom of choice of the MPs in the majority? And how relevant is it? And how is anti-defection law facilitating this?
Who would you like?
Any of them.
Is a party whip undemocratic?
Okay.
You're the head of your party, so
Yeah.
she'll get into trouble, you won't.
No, I am of the opinion that this whip system should be limited only to the no confidence motion when it is brought in against a government. If I am an MP of a party, then that whip system should only be mandated if a no confidence motion is brought. As far as other legislation or other bills are concerned, there should be no whip system. But the worst, is that the B form, the parties who issue B form, we control. You don't even require whip now. Even if my MP sits with other opposition parties in some press conference, and I can show it to the speaker, and the speaker happens to be from the ruling party, then he can be disqualified immediately. So the whip system should be limited only to if a no confidence motion is brought against the government. But as far as other legislations are concerned, we should be free to voice our opinions and to exercise, because free speech is part of our constitution, it's a fundamental right. A party cannot control, and decide what should one say, what one shouldn't do. But whip system is fine as far as no confidence motion is concerned, because you go to the people and saying, I'm opposing this party. But as far as other legislations are concerned, I feel there is no requirement for a whip to be issued.
So I quite agree with him. And coming from a much smaller party as compared to the two national parties, I think many times when I have spoken on bills, they have become the party's line as well. So it has given us that independence to be able to speak. But of course, there are some common issues where political parties have to take a stance in tandem with whatever the state government is doing or our state politics is. So in those days, we have to obviously follow the entire party has to follow the same format. is what I'd say. But yes, larger parties I have seen where they issue whips and they decide who will speak. They will decide the duration of how much duration they will give to a leader to speak. And I've seen many parliamentarians who are good speakers are denied that chance because there is a whip. So maybe if something like this could be worked out where they give them a little independence to be able to speak their mind, would be a lot more fruitful and would probably have a more engaging and vibrant democracy as we know it within political party systems as well.
The Prime Minister has been very genius in even removing the whip. In Rajya Sabha, the Congress whip was for an MP from Assam. So on the day of 370,
Kalita.
Yeah.
he brought him inside the BJP. He resigned. So, we have to give credit to the Prime Minister for removing the whip system also.
And interesting that when he said that in the all-party meeting, the Prime Minister speaks about parliamentary democracy. He was missing throughout the session in the Rajya Sabha. He did not even attend a single session or answered a single question. So for the OBC reservation amendment, we had two former Prime Ministers sit through the entire discussion, which is Dr. Manmohan Singh ji and Devi Gowda ji. Our Prime Minister, current Prime Minister was missing through it all.
So hi everyone, this is Junaid. So my question is to Owaisi sir, that over the years we have seen you in the parliament raising voice against the in support of backward communities on their economic and social backwardness. So as a young upcoming policy professionals, so what are the options and opportunities we could have after going through this public policy professional course and becoming public policy professionals? So how could we work on those issues and what opportunities we could excel in?
Well, you can definitely join PRS, to get a first-hand experience of how MPs work, how the parliament system works or it doesn't work. Because I feel that PRS has done a great service to parliamentary democracy over the years, and I have really benefited from their LAMP, fellowship which they have, and I've seen those. At least I have 4 or 5 LAMP assistants who had worked with me. 2 have gone to Harvard. They have come back. One is a very upcoming Supreme Court lawyer. One is doing a great policy work in the backward area of Simanchal of Bihar. Now he's doing his PhD in JNU. So yes, there is immense scope for you. And then, if you want to commit a suicide, you can join politics. That will really help you, in terms of every way, economically, physically. I'm just joking, but it really helps if you join politics, because then you have a great understanding of how public policy works. And unfortunately, I'm speaking for myself, we don't have that. I have learned so many things from those PRS people, which I didn't know. I have to, confess to it.
Okay, can we pass the mic to the gentleman in the back row with the orangish shirt? Please, could I please call it? Just to be fair, because otherwise everyone will take the mic. I've been doing this for too long.
I'm missing you.
Thank you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So, Mr. Owaisi, with all due respect, I have a question for you. So, I just wanted to ask you, while it is very intellectually stimulating for us to have a conversation here, while we go out of the room, we all go back to normal politics. I just have a question that the BJP, we all have accused for religious polarization. Your brother itself in 2013 in a speech went viral that if the police goes out for 15 minutes, we can target Hindu community, and he reiterated the same thing in 2019. So I just want to understand, how is the opposition very different from the ruling party? Is it choosing between the lesser of the two devils?
No, thank you for asking a repeated question. Wherever I go, it follows me. I have a repeated answer to it. So yes, 2013, that matter is sub judice. 2019 is a made-up thing. There's no truth in it. But you see, you should understand that being in power, that is running a country, and trying your utmost best to change not only the social fabric, but the whole basic structure of the constitution. that this country should be run on the basis of supremacy of a religion. That is where the conflict starts. Because if the Prime Minister stands up in the Parliament as a first-time Prime Minister and says that we got this power after what, 1000 saal ki ghulami, after 1000 years of servitude. As far as I know, the Britishers, East India Company rulers for 250 years. So what about others? What does that convey to you? You know, I can give you numerous examples of the ruling party ensuring that a supremacy of a religion, or not even religion, but an ideology, is imposed on all of us. Please understand that India is a union of states. India, you know, we wrongly call the government in Delhi as center. It's a union. You know, union includes the states. So when you say union, you represent diversity. Diversity of belief, diversity of thought, diversity of thinking, which the present ruling dispensation does not believe in diversity. For example, Mr. Modi talked about cooperative federalism. Can you please, I want to know from you, you are going to be studying in Kautilya, what is cooperative federalism? Then a brainwave came to him, he said, cooperative, competitive federalism. How can you have cooperation and competition? Either you cooperate or you compete. So this is what it is. And yes, even if I or any of my party members make any speech which violates the rule of law, they will be taken to task. But I can give you numerous examples of speeches where no one has been touched. Take the recent example, what happened at Jantar Mantar. You know, I don't want to repeat that language. But mashallah, within 24 hours, the main accused came out. Within 24 hours. What does that tell you? You know, what does that shows you? The Delhi riot. You had a Delhi assembly election, Goli Maro. Now, mashallah, he is a minister now. So what does that tell you? So, you know, that is why I say that working for a imposition of a supremacist ideology which contravenes the constitution is completely wrong. That is what, and yes, I am proud to raise issues pertaining to the Muslim minority. But I am not imposing my ideology on you. I am not asking for the Sharia should be made the law of this land. I am saying the Constitution of India guarantees me certain rights. I should get those rights. I want my share in India's polity. This is nothing wrong in that. In fact, it strengthens our democracy, our secularism, and it inspires faith in the Constitution. That is what is my opinion on your question, or answer to your question.
Okay, yes, the young lady here. I'll come back to that side.
Hello everyone, I'm Soumya. My question is to OIC sir. In your previous interview, a journalist has asked you why your party works only for the Muslims, and your answer was quite convincing that why don't you ask the same question to those who has formed on the basis of caste, linguism or regionalism. So in your opinion, don't you think that this is going to bring schism in a diversified country like ours?
Well, you see, India, as in 2011 census, we have the 11th census said in a recent article written in Indian Express, if my memory serves me right, we have around about 1,500 religions and some 1,700 languages are spoken. And if everyone, the Constitution guarantees me right to work for everyone. But it is wrong to say that I only work for Muslims. I would request you that I would invite all of you to once visit my party office in Darussalam and just come and sit for half an hour, 40 minutes as someone comes. And then you should do, you can sit beside me, very close, and decide for yourself how many Muslims and non-Muslims come 6 days a week. When I say Muslim empowerment, is that going against the Constitution? Is that going against the country? No. There is an empirical evidence which clearly shows that Muslims are backward socially, educationally. The highest dropout rate are Muslims. The lowest number of Muslim graduates are Muslims. Why is that? Because there is a systemic discrimination. And I am not using it, to ensure or to get some sort of sympathy from you or to patronize me. I am saying that we will fight for it, we'll struggle for it. And the crass reality of Indian democracy is this. Let me tell you one thing. I'll give you one example. I was an MP in 2013. I was sitting in Lok Sabha and the same question was asked to me by a fellow MP from Congress party. And what we see in Central Hall was that there were some 29 MPs walking together and going and meeting Dr. Manmohan Singh. He said, "Tu mera sawal ka jawab nahi." I said, "This is my answer, look at that." He said, "What is this?" He said, "All these 29 MPs are from Thakur community going and meeting Manmohan Singh to ensure that the Gen General, his date of birth is corrected, cutting across party lines." This is the reality. And Ambedkar rightly said that locks of power are opened if you have the keys of power. You don't have the keys of representation. If you have representation, fine. I can tell you that in Telangana, we have 60,000 Muslim boys and girls studying in government schools free of cost from class 6 to class 12. Why can't this be replicated in every parts of bigger states of Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh? Who stops you? 60,000. You must go and see as public policy students the timorous schools in Telangana. This can be replicated, but this is not being done. Every day it is for me, it is as a community, it is like a threat to my life. I cannot, not a day passes when you see a video or a threat. So this is more important now for people like me to ask for Muslim empowerment. And the counter question will be, it will lead to polarization. Polarization has not happened because of me. Polarization happened because of the majority community voting for Modi. It is not Muslims who voted for Modi, and I'm being very blunt over here. From 31%, Mr. Modi has gone up to 38%. Total vote share has gone to 51%. It is people from majority community who have made a Modi a demigod. Good luck to you.
Okay, let's get more questions. The gentleman in the green shirt in the middle, and can't miss you, bright green shirt. Yeah.
ओबीसी अमेंडमेंट में अब एक चांस दिख रहा है. सो ओवैसी साहब ने अभी पार्लियामेंट में वो कहा है कि पिछले 2 सालों से महाराष्ट्र में जिस तरह से शिवसेना काम कर रही है कि ना एग्ज़ाम होने दे रही है, मतलब एग्ज़ाम हो नहीं रहे हैं, स्टूडेंट जो पास हो चुके हैं उनको मतलब ये नहीं मिल रही है, अपॉइंटमेंट नहीं मिल रही है, सुसाइड कर रहे हैं स्टूडेंट जो पास हो चुके हैं MPSC. उसके बाद में लोग या फिर मीडिया या फिर जो रूलिंग पार्टी है वो बार बार मराठा आरक्षण पर बात करती है, पर मुस्लिम आरक्षण की कहीं बात नहीं है महाराष्ट्र में. जिस तरह से अभी ओवैसी साहब ने भी कहा कि मुस्लिमों को सिर्फ खजूर और इफ्तार पार्टी में खुश कर देते हैं और बाकी मराठा आरक्षण की बात होती है. तो अभी मैं ये पूछना चाहता हूँ कि कोई पॉलिसी है जिसके अंदर अब महाराष्ट्र में या फिर महाराष्ट्र में ही कि मुस्लिमों को कहीं आरक्षण मिल सके, और ना हो तो ऐसी कौन सी पॉलिसी होनी चाहिए सर जिसके अंदर महाराष्ट्र में ये जो बैकवर्ड कम्युनिटीज़ है उनको ये रिजर्वेशन मिले.
Priyanka, do you want to take that? I think reservation on religious lines is not is illegal.
That's एक तो हाँ, जो आपका सवाल है, 2 सवाल हैं. एक आपने मराठा रिजर्वेशन के बारे में कहा. पिछले 2 साल से ये प्रॉब्लम क्यों आई, सिर्फ मराठा रिजर्वेशन को लेकर नहीं आई. वो 2018 में संविधान में फेरबदल करने का काम केंद्र सरकार ने किया था. जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट का जब मराठा रिजर्वेशन की हियरिंग आई थी सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने उसको इंटरप्रेट ये किया कि वो सारे सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट्स डिसाइड करेंगे. अर्लियर स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स के पास होते थे, स्टेट माइनॉरिटी कमीशंस ये सभी डिसाइड करते थे क्या कौन से परसेंटेज पे किस अनुसार उनको रिजर्वेशन मिलेगा. तो रिलीजन के आधार पे नहीं होता है, वो कास्ट और कम्युनिटीज़ की माइनॉरिटीज़ OBC SC ST इसके आधार पे होता है सबसे पहले. तो ये जो 2021 में जो आज कल आपने कुछ दिनों पहले ये डिस्कशन सुना था पार्लियामेंट में, वो उनकी भूल सुधार करने का काम हुआ था जो 2018 में इस केंद्र सरकार ने ही किया था. उन्होंने आप लोगों के हित में, OBC के हित में कोई काम नहीं किया है. उन्होंने जो गलती की है उसको ठीक किया. अब बात आपने महाराष्ट्र की कही, 2 साल से MPSC एग्ज़ाम्स हो रहे हैं, वो नहीं हो रहा है, आप भी देख रहे हैं, हम सब भुगत रहे हैं 2 साल में क्या क्या हुआ है। और पर हमारे मुख्यमंत्री जी ने बिल्कुल कहा है कि इस पे कार्रवाई होगी। एक सुसाइड हुआ था जो खुद मुख्यमंत्री उनके परिवार से मिलकर आए थे और कहा था ये हम और होने नहीं देंगे, वील वर्क ऑन इट। सो दिस इज़ समथिंग वेयर यू एक्नॉलेज कि देयर इज़ अ प्रॉब्लम एंड यू ट्राई एंड फाइंड सॉल्यूशंस फॉर दैट आफ्टर एक्नॉलेजमेंट। जब एक्नॉलेजमेंट ही ना हो तो फ्रस्ट्रेशन होता है एंड यू सी स्प्राउट्स ऑफ के रिलीजन बेस्ड रिजर्वेशंस होना चाहिए। रही बात दूसरी, शिवसेना ने अपने अमेंडमेंट में, जब ये OBC रिजर्वेशन का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट हुआ, शिवसेना ने बाकायदा ये कहा कि आप ये जो 50% का जो कैप है आप उसको हटा दीजिए और कास्ट सेंसस होना चाहिए। उसके आधार पे एवरी स्टेट वुड ऑल्सो बी एबल टू डिसाइड किस आधार पे हमें रिजर्वेशन करने हैं। जो केंद्र सरकार में जब ये वोटिंग के लिए आया, वॉइस वोटिंग हुई, बीजेपी के सारे MPs ने हाथ उठाकर कहा कि वो ये कैप नहीं हटाना चाहते हैं, बिकॉज ऑफ विच वो कैप नहीं हटा है। सो वी विल कंटिन्यू टू वर्क फॉर द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द पीपल। We will not, I would personally not want to divide it on the basis of religion. क्योंकि एक तरफ अगर हम मुस्लिम एम्पावरमेंट की बात करते हैं और दूसरी तरफ हम फिर बात करते हैं कि नहीं इस आधार को रिजर्वेशन मिलना चाहिए, इसको नहीं मिलना चाहिए, you're depriving someone also because you all have been deprived over so many years, which I agree. So that is my belief, that is my personal understanding. बट ये होना चाहिए कि आप वो 50% कैप हटाइए जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट रूलिंग थी और केंद्र सरकार कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट के माध्यम से कर सकती है, वो नहीं हो रहा है। So I think उसी आधार पे we will be able to do justice to those who have faced inequalities over the years, over the centuries.
We have time for just 2 more questions.
Can I just
one
answer
here.
on this one?
Yeah.
महाराष्ट्र में कांग्रेस NCP की सरकार ने मुसलमान और मराठा को आरक्षण दिया। मुसलमानों को महमूद रहमान कमेटी की रिपोर्ट पर दिया और मराठाओं को नारायण राणे की रिपोर्ट थी, वो जो भी। हाई कोर्ट, जब मुंबई हाई कोर्ट में गया मसला ये, तो मुंबई हाई कोर्ट ने कहा कि मराठाओं को रिजर्वेशन इसलिए नहीं मिल सकता क्योंकि वो सोशली एजुकेशनली बैकवर्ड नहीं है। मुसलमानों को एजुकेशन में मिल सकता क्योंकि महमूद रहमान कमेटी ने एम्पेरिकल डेटा से बता दिया बैकवर्ड है। एम्प्लॉयमेंट में नहीं मिल सकता क्योंकि 50% क्रॉस करे। जब शिवसेना की सरकार आई तो शिवसेना की सरकार ने सिर्फ मराठाओं को आरक्षण दिया। वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने, जहां पर सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये कहा कि आपको पावर नहीं है इंक्लूड करने की स्टेट को, सेंटर को है, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये भी कह दिया कि एम्पेरिकल एविडेंस है ही नहीं मराठाओं का बैकवर्डनेस का। हमारा क्वेश्चन ये है कि जिनका हाई कोर्ट ने कह दिया कि इनका एम्पेरिकल एविडेंस है, आप उनको नहीं देना चाहते। ये सेलेक्टिव अपलिफ्टमेंट एम्पावरमेंट है। और किसी भी एतबार से मैं कह रहा हूं, आप मराठा का डिस्क्रिमिनेशन, मुसलमानों का डिस्क्रिमिनेशन, मराठा का लिटरेसी, मुसलमानों का लिटरेसी देख लो आप, हर एतबार से महमूद रहमान कमेटी एक आईना है। आखिरी बात 50% का, ये बात बिल्कुल सही है कि जो 50% है उनको 27% मिल रहा है, जो 20% है उनको 50% मिल रहा है। तो इसके ऊपर भी इस सरकार को करना पड़ेगा। मगर सबसे अहम काम यह है कि सब कैटेगराइजेशन होना चाहिए, क्योंकि एक OBC कम्युनिटी, 3-4 OBC कम्युनिटी मिलकर 60% बेनिफिट उठा रहे हैं। तो वो कैटेगराइजेशन करना है। और मेरे को नहीं मालूम ये सरकार करेगी नहीं करेगी, मगर रिलीजियस ग्राउंड पे मुसलमानों को नहीं दे सकते, बिल्कुल सही है। मगर महाराष्ट्र में 50 बैकवर्ड कास्ट ऑफ मुस्लिम है, मुसलमानों भी कास्ट है। ये बोलना है कि मुसलमान कास्ट है, वो रियलिटी है भारत की। तो उनको मिला है, मुसलमानों को एज अ कम्युनिटी, एज अ रिलीजन नहीं मिला, बल्कि उनके कास्ट को मिला है।
Hello everyone, my name is Priyam Awasthi. My question is to Mr. Owaisi. Sir, what are the reasons you opposed National Judicial Accountability Commission? Sir, democracy as an institution works with checks and balances. So the present judicial collegium system has a history. It was the time when executives tried to overpower the judiciary. So don't you think that we need a proper legislation in place to hold the judiciary accountable?
By the executive.
You cannot. The constitution scheme of things don't allow executive to interfere in the independent working of the judiciary. Once you allow that, then we are violating the basic structure of the constitution. So national judicial accountability basically was, in short, that the Prime Minister will decide who will be the judge from Supreme Court to High Court. That cannot be the case. That cannot be. It is the judiciary who have everything, who know everything. And yes, the executive is involved in the appointment of the judges in terms of all IB reports are shared about a particular individual, whether he's qualified, what his background check is done. And there's a consultation process. But end of the day, it is the judiciary's independent power which they must exercise. Otherwise, it will be the justice system which will be suffering. For example, 370 is not heard, CAA, God knows when it will come. Even without, but if you have NGAC in active, it will be a sad day for separation of powers.
We're going to extend this session by 10 more minutes because there are so many people who've raised hands. So the young lady in the middle first. And incidentally, I think we can all agree that the collegium system of appointment of judges, which is currently there, needs to be more transparent. I mean, even the courts need to be much more transparent in how they're choosing names, which they're not at the moment.
Totally
It's
agree
very
with that.
opaque.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Vinaya. My question is for both of you. You mentioned, obviously, sir, like how the parliament is kind of under threat, the system of parliament. So do you agree with the Freedom House's categorization that India is partly free, and even the Sweden-based institute called us an electoral autocracy? So do you agree with their assessment of India?
Both of you can answer.
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
I unfortunately agree with what they have to say, yes. They know two things about it, because if Parliament is being, if the legislature is being weakened day by day, and only edifice remains, then it is wrong, because Parliament is there to check the government, to expose the government, to stop them from doing anything which goes against the constitution. And elected autocracy example is one wherein you have a commerce minister, he curses all industrialists. You're anti-national. I thought, I know people who disagreed with BJP are anti-national. Now even the industrialists have joined his esteemed group. Good luck to them. You have a commerce minister saying that. You're anti-national because, so this is what is happening. Unfortunately, it is true.
I quite agree with what OACG said. As far as other reports coming from other international agencies are concerned, we don't really need to look at them to see what's happening in our country. And for us to be able to speak up is a far cry from how much we should be speaking up is lacking. Whether it is our media, whether it is all the backbone that make the democracy work, are under tremendous pressure. For example, he brought in the commerce minister, and it was said at an event which is, one of the major industries gathering that gets together. None of them have spoken a word, stood up for themselves. So till you don't stand up for yourselves, in individual spaces we all are, but till you don't, as an industry, as a group, stand up for yourselves and make your voices heard, these reports will continue to happen. They will be called as some, a mechanism of international agencies to defame the nation. Pegasus also was termed as a way to derail the monsoon session. So those are things that will keep happening. It will be us who will have to fight for every single thing of what we believe is the idea of India.
Okay,
So, sir, can I ask?
No, please don't snatch the mic. I'll call on the person, the gentleman in the light blue shirt in the middle row with the glasses. Thank you.
My question is to Mr. Owaisi. So why is there no women leadership in AIMM, and don't you think it's time for it? The other question is, do you think Indian Muslims will vote for a guy who doesn't wear a skull cap and who doesn't grow a beard? How important is the politics of attire?
What is the second question? Come again?
Do you think Indian Muslims will vote for a guy who doesn't wear a skull cap and who doesn't grow a beard?
Yeah.
How important is the politics of attire in electoral politics?
Well, let me answer the second question first. Muslims have been voting for people who don't have beard and who don't wear a skull cap. That has been their biggest mistake. Had they voted for a Muslim wearing a skull cap and a beard, they would have got at least some fair deal, you know. Because from 1950 onwards, Muslims have always been voting for people who are clean shave, who wear Savile Row suits or who are wearing now different attire, you know. And what is it that we have got as a community? You know, what we have right now as a community is based on our hard work, our efforts. As with other castes and communities, there has always been a system or a government which has come to the rescue and uplifted them. That has not been the case with the Muslim community. The biggest problem, I blame, the blame has to be apportioned at least 20% on the Muslim communities, because we are happy in only survival. Every election comes, zindagi maut ka मामला है. You know, या तो जियोगे या मर जाओगे. And with due respect to my honorable MP's party, in Maharashtra, the Congress and NCP campaigned in Maharashtra saying, OWC को वोट मत दो, वरना शिवसेना BJP आ जाएंगी. What happens after result? Congress is sitting in the lap of Uddhav Thackeray. So, you know, they have voted not for me. Had they voted for me, I would have had more than 2 MLAs. So the community is now realizing, the youth among the Muslims are realizing that it is no more a battle of life and death. Because you are at the abyss now. As a community, I'm at the abyss. I cannot go more below. You know, I have to only rise up. And the only way of rising up is that to have your political empowerment in having an independent political voice. Because the secular parties have failed badly. You name me one secular party who's able, who's brave enough to utter the word MUSLIM. They don't want to use it because we will not get the Hindu vote. What I am told is that you just fall in line. I don't want to fall in line. I want to lead the line. This is my struggle. As far as women empowerment, sir, we have many Muslim women corporators in Maharashtra, in Hyderabad, in Telangana, in Andhra. I agree with you. We require more. Definitely, we are trying and ensure that we will have more women MLAs, now MLAs also, inshallah.
Okay, the young lady in the green shirt at the back, please.
Hi, so my question is to Priyanka ma'am. I wanted to know your take about the debate that's been going on about when should we open schools. Everything other than schools have been prioritized till now, and every time there's a date given, but I know there's parent pressure and all of that, and things have been, people are saying that we'll have to wait till the time all the children are vaccinated, but we all know how long that's going to take. So I wanted to know your take on that, and even if sir can add his.
That's a very important question, and as a mother, I can answer that question. But before answering that question, there's just one thing I'd like to say. The country has seen several iconic Muslim leaders. The country has also together, maybe, yes, some inequalities exist, quite a few inequalities exist, but to discard any welfare movements that have happened for a particular religion is unfair to lakhs and lakhs of those people and leaders who have worked for the upliftment of Muslims. And I would not reduce it to just one religion. I would want to look at everyone as a citizen of an independent country which deserves equal rights as stated by the Constitution of this country. So having said that, I would just want to say with regards to your particular question, as a mother, my mind says that it is time that our children start going to school, because I can see my daughter struggling with online schooling, struggling to concentrate in what is being spoken. I see her unable to understand concepts and her inability to be able to ask questions in real time. I see her struggling to connect with her friends in a physical world where she could have taken time out to take the loo breaks also, to take the canteen breaks and take time out to come back to the classroom. I can see her interpersonal skills suffer. I can see her mental health suffer because of it. But they are taking it all along silently. While we continue to voice what we feel, there are lakhs of children who are unable to do that. That's what my mind says. And that's what my heart also says, that yes, she should be able to go and resume normal schooling. But the challenge that exists in front of any government or any school or any parent is, would my daughter be safe in that environment at this point in time where we are all masked up, where they do not have a vaccine to be able to safeguard them? So we may vaccinate the teachers. How do we stop really young children to be able to not physically be able to speak to their friends, etc.? So those are things which I'm sure we'll have to together find a way out. But the threat of a third wave exists, and we cannot do away with that. We are a country with a large population, a large young population, which we have to be mindful of. So I would personally believe that if we have managed to achieve certain percentage of fully vaccinated population in a country, then we can look at this particular option. But unfortunately, that is a far cry.
I think in Delhi today, classes 10 and 12 are going to start going to school, and I think only for some days a week. We have time.
Even
for
Maharashtra has opened up some schools, but parents also not coming forward, really.
Yeah, a lot of parents are nervous. There's just time for one more question. I'm just gonna, black mask, blue shirt. I don't know, I'm partial to the color blue.
So.
Oh, well, yours is, well, go ahead, that's fine.
So hi Priyanka, hi Mr. Owaisi, hi Nidhi. So I'm Jasmeet. I have two questions that are totally connected with policy reforms. So I'll start with Mr. Owaisi. I remember, sir, you pushed for a private members bill back in 2018. You asked the government to reduce the age to contest elections in our country. So my question is, don't you all think that before that we need a statutory or constitutional provision for student body elections across universities in our country? And my second question is, don't you think we need a parliamentary reform in our electoral system? We are seeing that farmers are protesting that they have not been involved in the policy formulation and the farm bills, and women are demanding representation in parliament, the 33% constitutional representation. So don't you think India can have a different representation system? Like, can we demand a functional representation system in India? So first is, can we have a constitutional provision for student body elections in India? And the second one is, can we have a functional representation system in India?
I'm adding to it that we have, talking about caste census for OBC, but we have women census in place, and we have their the role they are playing in politics. So what's the hurdle for women reservation? Why not talking about that?
By the way, that bill, I think, was first introduced when I was in college. So that was, I don't even want to say how many years ago. Owaisi Saab and then Priyanka, and that we'll end on that note here.
Actually, the reason I have introduced that private members bill is because after 18, you're allowed to do many things, isn't it? Why not contest elections? Why? I mean, I don't understand this difference from 18 to 25. What's going to happen? Are you going to become an Einstein when you reach 25, is it? When I'm able to vote for you, and I'm able to decide who's good, who's going to be bad MP or good MLA or good corporator, why not give him a chance? And moreover, when you have, 60% of population at the age of 35, it's very important. And the most important point is that the younger people are not at all interested in going out and voting on polling day. They are very good in, having some public policy people working, but end of the day, as an MP, I've seen the polling percentage is pathetic. What, 50% Hyderabad, 51%, and what is the percentage of youth who are coming out voting? Very less. They're not at all interested. So why not have them and give them a chance? At the end of the day, I feel that if you bring in those section of your voters, I call them voters, and make them elected leaders, it will definitely help them. So student union elections, some universities do it, they should do it, but why stop an 18-year-old boy from contesting from assembly elections or MP election? And what was the second question about?
Functional representation.
Functional?
Representation.
Of?
Various sections of...
Like women's reservation, for example.
Oh, you're talking about the proportional representation, is it? Fantastic. I want it. Fantastic. But then again, when I say this, he wants to divide the country. So even Mr. Advani talked about the German system. That is also fine with me. Why not? Have it. But then again, every new thing, especially with PR, many political antennas will go up. I am for it. I would really want it because, why should, if I win with 2 lakh votes, why should those 2 lakh votes go to waste? You are empowering the voter. End of the day, you are empowering the voter. As far as women reservation is concerned, we must ask the Prime Minister, what he wants to do with that because is he really interested? Is he not interested? We don't know.
Priyanka Chaturvedi.
So, like Nidhi was saying that women's reservation bill was passed in one of the houses when she was going to college. And this is exactly the point I made when on Women's Day, we women were patronized by giving 3 minutes to 4 minutes for us to speak what we want. So I said we were asking for 33% then, I'm asking for 50% now. But there's another point I'd like to make here. Besides reservation, I have also come to believe, and what I am seeing happen on ground, till political parties do not take this responsibility of having representation within their systems and having women in positions of power within their political parties, in decision-making spaces, in choices of who will be standing for an election, till then, reservation will continue to be just something that we have to fulfill because it's been mandated. I've seen that with TMC, Trinamool Congress did that, BJD did that. As soon as BJD and TMC said that 14%, 33%, 50% of women will contest the Lok Sabha elections, we will ensure that tickets are given to them. We have seen a rise of representation of women in the Lok Sabha. And that is how change happens. So if Mr. Modi is not doing this, if for 23, 25 years we have been denied this, I think it is high time we also start holding political parties accountable for, just merely paying lip service of 50%, 33%, or when we come to power, we will give you this reservation. Instead of dangling that, we should ask them, what are you doing within your systems?
Isn't that better than actually reserving seats?
Actually, I have come to
a certain number of tickets.
I've started to move in that direction, that if we look at mandating that, because that is in your control. As a president of a political party like he is, as a leader of your party, let's make way for women. We will reserve so many seats for the women. Let's have them in, for example, the Congress decision-making body, or for that matter, the BJP decision-making body. How many women are part of those decision-making bodies? The topmost, the CWCs,
There is only one decision-making body in the BJP.
So is the case with the other one too.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly. There are 2 high commands.
Yeah, so the point is that you have to consciously try and do that to kind of make a change and have more representation.
By the way, in my college debate back then, this is the late 90s, I actually took the position I was anti-reservation for women. I said, give them more tickets, don't give reservation in parliament. But, we began this entire conversation with both these parliamentarians about obstruction of parliament and what's happening to it as an institution. And I just wrote a column this week on the same thing, in which I had found quotes of Arun Jaitley's and Sushma Swaraj when they were in opposition and they were obstructing parliament. Arun Jaitley had said, there are occasions when obstruction in parliament brings greater benefits to the country. Our strategy does not permit us to allow the government to use parliament without being held accountable. And Sushma Swaraj said, not allowing parliament to function is also a form of democracy like any other forum. So look, we've come full circle, as far as that debate is concerned. Thank you so very much to both you, Priyanka Chaturvedi, and to you, Mr. Owaisi, for joining us at the Kautilya School of Public Policy, answering all these questions. Thank you for the wonderful questions that all of you put up. Some of them were pretty tough and put you in a bit of a spot. But it was really great to talk to you and have this candid interaction. Thank you.